Okay, so for the past few weeks we've been talking about the rather vexing business of personal responsibility. And I say vexing because, of course, to accept the premise that your life is your responsibility, to accept that you are the master of your own fate, that you are the captain of your own soul, is to also accept that some of the things that go wrong are your fault. You can't have it both ways. And that's an important thing to say in church, because of course the point of Christianity is that Jesus is for you even when, perhaps even especially when, you mess things up and get things wrong. Let's finish this series off by having a look at a well-known, perhaps the best known of the stories Jesus told. So we're looking at the Gospel according to St. Luke chapter 15, and verse 2, which is a criticism of Jesus. And as you can see, this criticism comes from a group of people whom Luke calls Pharisees and teachers of law. So these are the representatives of the religious establishment, and the early records of Christianity show that these are first-rate people. These are the sort of people who can look at their life and say, you know what? I'm doing pretty good today. And there's a reason why I'm doing pretty good today. It's because I've always made smart decisions. The reason why I ended up in this awesome place with this awesome stuff, with this awesome life, is because that is exactly where my morality and my wisdom and my smarts have taken me. I deserve to be in this brilliant place. Happy for me. And so their criticism of Jesus is that this man welcomes sinners. The word sinner means what you've come to think it means. It means someone who makes bad decisions, who's made poor life choices. And they say with some incredulity, he also eats with those people. Now, the best way to understand what they're getting at here is to think about how you feel at 7 o'clock in the evening after a hard day at work, and you're sitting in that chair you have at home. You know, the one that's got the impression of your bottom just perfect. It's taken years to get that impression there. You've earned it. And you're sitting in that chair and you're watching the hockey game, and maybe you're having a glass of beer, and the doorbell rings, and instantly you're angry. So you haul yourself up, unaided as of yet, out of your favourite chair, and you shuffle to the door, and there standing with a cheesy grin on his face is some Mormon or something. And he wants to talk about religion or politics or something like that. Well, instantly you're angry. That person is not welcome at your door. All of your emotions, all of your feelings exude unwelcomeness. However, if you get up out of your favourite chair and you shuffle to your door and you open it, and they're standing before you as a long-lost buddy, an old college friend who you haven't seen in 15 years, and he's got a six-pack, and he says, hey, I was just passing through town and I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing. Well, that's different. That's different. You say to him, welcome. Let's turn the game off. Let's catch up. Let's shoot the breeze. That is exactly the word that the Pharisees used to describe the emotion that Jesus has for these people who've screwed up their own life. The word welcome that Luke uses is a very specific kind of word. It means something like, I'm not just happy to see you, I'm happy to see you. I'm not just hanging out with you, I love hanging out with you. So here's the point the writer is making. There's something about this Jesus that takes particular pleasure. It's not a job for him. It's not something he does because he feels he should do it. He takes pleasure. He likes hanging out with people who've made poor life choices and screwed everything up. He likes people who can say of themselves, it was my fault. I messed up and it was me. This is Jesus. And so in that regard, the word welcome in this sentence, appearing as it does in the mouths of the Pharisees, is expressed with a certain amount of incredulity. Why? Why does Jesus enjoy them so much? It makes no sense. And so then in response to that incredulity, Jesus tells the well-known story of the prodigal son. He says, there was a man who had 2 sons. Now, straight away, you know this is going to be a heartbreaking story. I don't mean to be pessimistic, because I know how much you love your children. I know how much you feel about them. But the love we have for them contains the potential for pain. The young children whom we push in swings and teach how to tie shoelaces invariably grow up into young adults and make decisions of their own. And in some of those decisions, they have the potential to cause indescribable pain in the lives of their parents. The irresponsibility of those closest to us doesn't just have an adverse effect on them, it spills over into our lives as well. We feel the pain of those we love. Anyway, so there's 2 sons in this story, and the younger one says to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Now, when I read this story, I assume 2 things. First thing I assume is that this young man is about 17 years old. The reason I assume that is because in his culture, men typically got married at 18 or 19. This man isn't married, so I'm assuming he's 17 and knows absolutely everything. The second thing I assume is that this man has an increasingly difficult relationship with his parents. He's at that stage in life where he's really starting to resent his parents because his parents just don't get it. They don't understand why he should be allowed to do the things he wants to do. They don't understand why they should stay out of his business. And that's the problem with parents generally, isn't it? They just don't get it. And they're not as smart as we are. And so disillusioned with his home life, he quite naturally begins to fantasize about a life somewhere else. And so, like any enterprising young man, he comes up with a plan, and his plan is a good one. He'll move to a different city, he'll do his own thing, get on with his own life, and his parents won't be able to get on with his nerves. It's a good plan. However, unfortunately for him, his plan doesn't match his budget. I suppose in that regard he suffers from the same curse many of us suffer from. He knows exactly what he would do if he had money, but he just doesn't have money. Bummer for him. Bummer for us. So anyway, he goes to his father, and Jesus says that his father owns an estate. In the ancient world, Israel, of course, is an agricultural economy. So I'm going to assume that the father in this story is reasonably well off, and I'm going to further assume that he owns some kind of agribusiness. Maybe a farm, maybe he raises animals, maybe he has a cheese-making facility. Jesus, after all, did say, "Blessed are the cheesemakers." And this business is the means with which the father supports the entire family. That support is explicit and deliberate in the story Jesus tells. The word estate that Jesus uses in verse 12 doesn't mean, I'll just tell you what it is. It's the Greek word bios. And the word bios, as you know, means life. So what this 17-year-old teenager who knows everything about life is saying to his father actually is, "Dad, I'm done with this home crap. I want you to give me not money, it's even more crass than that. I want you to give me your life. I want to have a slice of that thing that puts bread on your table. I want to have a slice of that thing that puts wine in your belly, that pays the bills, that pays the rent. I want a slice of your very soul. I want a slice of your life. That's what I want." Now, in the conservative culture of first century Palestine, where these words were first spoken, this proposition is completely unthinkable. In the ancient world, there's an expectation that a son will do the same job as his father. After all, in a time before schools, the only skill that a child could expect to learn was whatever his father was able to teach him. So that meant that if your father was a farmer, bummer for you. In fact, this is part of the social contract between the generations. The social contract is that when I'm too old to work the family land, you will work the family land for me, and you'll keep me going. And then when you grow up and you're too old to work the family land, your children after you will work the family land, and they'll keep you going. It's like a pension that cascades down the generations. That's the assumption. So what this teenager is actually saying to his father is, hey Dad, whatever, I know that this farm has been in the family for like 18 generations, and I know you were kind of assuming that this was going to be a pension for you when you get old. I know you were assuming I was going to look after you and take care of you and pay your bills when you couldn't work. And I know you've been working towards that your whole life, but I know where I can score some excellent weeds, so let's do that instead. At this point in the story, Jesus' audience would have been, their jaws would have been on the floor. In their culture, this behavior is entirely unacceptable. So unacceptable, in fact, that it would have been obvious that Jesus was making this story up. Nothing this shocking could happen in real life. His audience just wouldn't have been able to believe what they were hearing. To them, this story would have sounded like a script from a sick movie. It's that bad. And then the sickness becomes surreal. Jesus goes on to say that the Father actually does what the Son asks for. He divides his property. He divides his bios, his life. He takes a slice of his pension, a slice of everything he's worked for his whole life, and he gives it to this 17-year-old know-it-all. And at this point, Jesus' audience are absolutely spellbound. They had to have been. This is just too bizarre. No father in his right mind would do something so silly. And of course, that's the point. The point that Jesus is making at this point in the story is that God lets people make mistakes. We sometimes wish that God would be like a puppet master in the sky, stopping people getting things wrong, but it doesn't work like that. To wish for that is to wish to live in a celestial North Korea or Saudi Arabia where you are not free to choose. But the worldview of the Bible and of Christianity is that God either cannot nor will not stop people making mistakes. And that's part of the deal, isn't it, of being a parent? Part of the deal of being in love. It involves watching the people you care for making decisions that you know full well are going to take them to a bad place. And that is similarly how it is with God. So then we're told that the young son gathered together all he had. I like how it says he had as though he worked for it. How do you like my BMW? How do you like my fancy clothes? How do you like my iPhone? Yeah, you didn't work for that, did you? Someone gave it to you. So he took together the money that he got from taking a slice of his father's pension and all that money that had taken generations to acquire. And with all that hard-earned money, he set off for a place that Jesus calls a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth on wild living. Now, I have to say that's not an entirely unexpected development, is it? I don't think anyone's shocked at this point in the story. And if we could zoom in on his life at this point, the scene would be somewhat R-rated, I think. There would be a hotel suite with white chairs and fur rugs. There would be drinks with an umbrella in them. There would be lines of white powder on the coffee table. There would be people in various states of undress and a monkey in the bathroom.
What's wrong with that?
Now what I find interesting about this picture is that from my perspective as a reader looking in on the story, I can see the train wreck round the corner. It's so obvious. It always is when you're looking at other people. And so I know that if this young man spends all his money on having a good time, eventually that's going to lead to a bad time. That's how life works. Those are the rules. But from inside the story, as a protagonist taking part in the events, I very much doubt this 17-year-old has that perspective. We never do at the time. The decisions that take us to a place of self-destruction don't seem destructive while we're involved in them. They just seem like fun. Almost never do we do a thing and think, if I do this, it'll ruin my life. We say, I'll do this and it'll be fun. We worry about the consequences later, but sooner or later the consequences come. Sooner or later we end up where we went. Sooner or later we sit down to a meal of what we prepared. That's how it works. So what do you know? Next sentence. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, as you know, first century Jewish culture, I should say just Jewish culture, is somewhat prejudiced against pigs. In Jewish culture, pigs were and are somewhat taboo creatures. And in the first century, this loathing of pork was so ingrained that people said if you even touched a pig or a pig-related product, that made you un-Jewish. That meant you were ostracized from society, from synagogue, from family. So within his own culture, this teenager has fallen pretty low. Things have worked out pretty bad for him. His story is now a tale of used-to-bes. He used to be the son of a rich man. He used to be doing well. He used to have potential. He used to have a future. He used to have good times. But now all that's used to be, now he's at rock bottom. Now he's ended up in a place that he never intended to be. And, I guess that happens to the best of us. We heard a little bit about it last week, and I think many of us have experienced that in our own lives too, through a series of bad decisions. You can become someone you never planned to be. You can end up in a place where you never planned to go. It happens. So in the next sentence we come to the low point, not always a bad thing. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating. In other words, he goes to the food bank and there's nothing there but pet food, but he thinks I can make a pie out of it anyway. Why are you laughing? It happens. And I think I've said to you before, being at the low point isn't always a bad thing. It's, don't despise the misery. Don't despise the failure. Don't despise it when it falls apart. It feels bad at the time, but if handled right, can sometimes be the making of you. It can be the best thing that happened in your story, and that seems to be the case here. From the low point, he then begins to turn around. Next sentence, we read that when he came to his senses, the phrase Jesus literally uses here is when he came to himself. That is, he comes to an accurate understanding of who he is and what he's done. It's as if the previous year or two were just some insanity that he had to go through, and now that he's through it and he's hit rock bottom for the first time in his life, he can think clearly. So with the mind thinking clearly, he starts talking straight, and he says to himself, wait a minute, how many of my dad's hired men have food to spare and I'm starving to death? That makes no sense. I know what I'll do. I'll set out and go back to my father. The phrase that jumps out at me there is set out. Set out. This isn't working, so I got to set out. This isn't happening for me, so I can't stay where I am. I need to go somewhere else. I need to set out, I need to set out, I need to set out. If you don't set out, If you don't take the jump, if you don't take the step, you'll never get where life can take you. You'll just stay where you are. I like that phrase. Anyway, so he decides to retrace his steps, to reverse the decisions that he's made. Not a bad idea. After all, I think I've said to you before, the best way to undo a series of bad choices is to begin making a series of good choices. However, retracing your steps doesn't mean that the past can be undone. It doesn't work like that. In this story, there are years of pain. In this story, there is the accumulated wealth of generations that has been spent. He's not going to get a refund from his drug dealer or the zookeeper. In this story, there are wasted years that will forever remain wasted. And so with his newfound wisdom, he correctly assumes that he just can't go back home and flop back into his old bed and pick up where he left off. Irresponsibility creates consequences, consequences that can't be repaired with a simple change of heart. It doesn't work like that. And he knows that. He knows that he's done wrong, and he knows there'll be a price to pay. And so he starts to rehearse a speech, like you do when you're going to be home late or something, you know. He practices. And he goes something like this. He says, I'll go home and I'll say to my dad, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I like that phrase. He owns it. Remember, you can't get better until you own your past. The only way you're going to guarantee not repeating your past in your future is by looking into the past and saying, that bit there, that was where I screwed up. That bit there, it wasn't all my fault, but that bit was my fault. That bit was where I went wrong, and I have to own it. And he does that in this sentence. I'll go home and I'll say to my dad, I sinned, I got it wrong, I know where I went wrong, I know exactly what I did wrong. And then he says, I'll say to my dad, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. In other words, I don't want my old room back, just let me sleep in the garden shed. I'll eat some of the cheese from the factory floor. I'm not asking for much. I just want to come home and not be hungry anymore. And so with that pre-rehearsed speech ringing over and over in his head as he goes home, he takes the journey. He takes step after step after step to a better place. Next sentence. At this point, Jesus' audience, their mouth is open. But the next details, Jesus is going to kick them in the guts. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Now, at this point in the story, the expectations of Jesus' audience are that a lecture would then ensue. That's what parents do, right? Your kid leaves home, your kid makes a mistake, your kid gets into trouble, your kid's life falls apart, your kid comes back. What your kid really needs at that point is a lecture. They need to know about the importance of not being stupid, right? However, as is often the case with Jesus, the twist makes the point. There is no lecture in this story. There is no sitting down and I hope you learned your lesson kind of speech. There's just a father running to his son with a big bear hug. And the nuances are thick in this story. In the ancient world, important men don't run. They walk, they stroll, they're occasionally carried, but they never run. Running was undignified. Actually, I think it still is. At least when I do it. It's unseemly, it's ungentlemanly. We don't do that kind of thing. This man, in this detail, is putting his dignity on the shelf. He's saying, to screw with who I am, to screw with the fact I'm a big business owner in this town. I don't care. All I care about in this second is that my son is home. And I've been looking on that horizon every day for the past 18 months, 20 months. I've been living for this moment. There's not been a second where I haven't thought about this day. And he's home. And dignity's on the shelf. This is a happy time. And so his son, there's a hug and there's tears and all that. And his son starts this speech, and the rehearsed speech probably didn't go that great. They never do. But he's about halfway through his speech, and his father just puts up his hand and says, "No, no, no, imperative. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and let's kill it. This son of mine was lost, now he's found. He was dead, now he's alive." Now read that sentence. What's the vibe in the sentence? What's the emotion in this sentence? Like, close your eyes and insert yourself into the scene. There's happiness, there's dancing, there's probably some drinking, there's music, there's a fatted, there's no sandwiches here. There's a cow on a spit. Everything about a cow on a spit sounds good to me. This sentence exudes joy and celebration and happiness. This guy's screwed up and now he's home. Let's throw a party. Insert yourself into the scene. It's happy, isn't it? You're liking this, aren't you? And if the story ended with this sentence, it would have been an awesome story. There would have been no kick in the guts. Jesus' audience, who were the Pharisees, who wanted to understand why he enjoys the company of sinners so much, they might have understood and they might have gone, oh, I kind of get the point. Maybe Jesus isn't so bad. It's all right. It's a great story. But Jesus can't help himself. He can't end the story there. It doesn't end with celebration. His audience would have recalled that at the start of the story, Jesus spoke about two sons. And so his audience would have naturally wondered, well, what happened to the other son? What happened to the other guy while that guy was out spending all his money on cocaine and women? Where was he? So in verse 25, we read that while the younger son was off partying in hotel suites, the older son was in the field. Which means he was working, being sensible, being responsible. So he's not like his brother. He's a worker. He's industrious. He's making something of his life. At this point in the story, we are all supposed to admire the other brother. He's been responsible. He's worked hard every day. He's gotten up early every morning. And here he is in the field like he's been every single day all his adult life. His muscles are glistening with his hard graft in the sun. And he hears this awful racket coming from his house. The Greek word that Luke uses means a sort of different noise. A noise that's hard to pin down. So it's not like there was singing, it's like there was singing and dancing. And it's not just like there was singing and dancing, there was also laughing. And it's not just like there was singing and dancing and laughing, there was like loud music as well, and it was all a bit too happy, and there was the sound of glasses and there was different, it was just this noise of happiness. And he finds it strange. He lives in the house. Odd he didn't get the memo. And so quite naturally he says to one of his colleagues in the field, and he says, "What's with all the noise? What's going on?" His servant tells him that the noise might be attributed to a party that his father is throwing in celebration of his son, your brother, who has come home. Here's the tipping point in the story. At this point, the story can go one way or another way. At this point, the brother can go back and join the party. He can put a smile on his face, maybe have a dance, have a slice of beef, enjoy himself, maybe get a girlfriend, who knows? Or he can be the other thing. Here's the difficulty. It's a difficulty you've struggled with at certain points in your life. When you're responsible, you get annoyed by irresponsible people. Can't help it. It makes you angry. And that's where the brother went. How could my dad do that? How could he? Has he forgotten what happened? Has he forgotten that he spent all the pension, that he jeopardized the business, that he broke his heart? Has he forgotten about the sleepless nights and all the hassle and all the junk? Like, did none of that happen? Are we just going to pretend that that was a bad dream? And now, welcome him home, fair enough, but a party? A feast nonetheless? And for many of Jesus' audience, and for many, I think probably all of us here today, we're on his side. Were you on his side? So it's just me and Joe who are the only idiots. Okay. Right? I'm angry with him. I'm annoyed with him. And so the next sentence, in his anger, he goes to his father and he says, all those years, all those years, I've been, keyword, kick in the guts, slaving for you. Never disobeyed your orders. Now remember, this is a made-up story. The older son in this story is a point that Jesus wants to make to the Pharisees who can't figure out why Jesus enjoys messed up people as much as he does. And the Pharisees in the story, they're just like this old responsible brother. They've worked hard at being good people. They've worked hard at having a good morality. And you know what? It hasn't been easy. There's been lots of substances they wanted to take but didn't take. There's been lots of parties they wanted to go to but they didn't go to. And yet insofar as they've devoted their lives to making good choices and wise decisions, they're good people and they've made it. And they've done all that with some measure of success, and they think they deserve God's approval. They think they've earned the smile on God's face. They think God likes them because they're good. Hence the bitter accusation in the voice of this older brother. Because he's worked hard and he's been a good boy, he thinks he deserves recognition, and that's why his words are filled with bitterness. You can see the angry tears in his eyes. You can see the accusation in his wagging finger as he raises his voice. You never even gave me a goat. All right? You didn't give me anything. Nothing. Now again, there's no doubt about it. This angry older brother's the better brother. He's lived a more productive, useful life. And the other brother, the guy who did all those things, he's neither to be emulated nor admired. He's not even to be liked, actually. We are to read this story and think little of that guy. And yet, though he's done bad things, though he's hurt his father, though he's ruined everything and become less than he was born to be, his father still loves him. This is the kick in the guts that Jesus wants to tell the religious people. There is a relentlessness to God that simply cannot stop loving people, regardless of where their choices take them. There is a relentlessness to God that will not give up on people, regardless of how screwed up they get themselves. The slug line in this cautionary tale isn't about wine, women and song. It's about religion and how dangerous it can be. Did you notice the word on the lips of the older brother? I've been slaving for you. Slaving. Slaving. Jesus is making a comment on their practice of religion. You're just slaving at it. Yeah, you never do anything wrong. Yeah, you read your Bible every day and you go to synagogue every morning and you don't dance, you don't chew, and you don't go with girls who do, or whatever it is you think you're meant to be doing. But there's no joy in your heart. There's no spring in your step. You're just a slave to the things you think matter. You are so out of touch with God. So out of touch with what He's into. And you're on the wrong side of the discussion. The wrong side of the emotion. You're not meant to be slaving at religion. It's meant to be about life. It's meant to be about enjoyment. It's meant to be about grabbing this thing God gave you with both hands and squeezing the most out of it. That's what it's meant to be about. And you've got it all wrong. Cautionary tale. Kick in the guts to religious people, which is a long way of introducing our next series that we're starting next week. Losing religion. It's about time. Looking forward to that very much. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next.